Hello, Book Stew viewers and listeners. The background is not the usual Book Stew background. I'm talking to you from home today because the studio is being renovated, but I'm still very thrilled to introduce Jorge Arteaga, who actually has a great title. It's Vice President of Movement Building, which I think is a pretty cool title for the organization Right to Be. And Jorge is here to talk today about his book. He has a co-author as well, Emily May, and the book is called I've Got Your Back. And it's a guide to stopping harassment on the street, at work, online. So Jorge, welcome to Book Stew. And if you could, please explain to the viewers and listeners how the organization evolved, because I originally contributed to a group called Hollaback, which has evolved into Right to Be.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Eileen. Right to Be, we're a movement to end harassment in all its forms and create a world filled with humanity. And we did originally start off as Hollaback. Hollaback was inspired by 7 young folks just talking about their experiences of harassment in the city in public spaces. But over the years, you can imagine, especially post 2016, we started to see folks wanting to bring bystander intervention into their workplaces. In 2014, then Hollaback, now Right to Be, started to work on online harassment, right, in response to Gamergate that happened. And so we saw a natural kind of iteration of our work. Our work was starting to be applicable in different fields, right, by the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. And so we fast forward, let's say I joined the organization back in 2019. So in 2019, we started to think about, how are we really talking about hate and harassment in all its forms? How is it taking up spaces that are not just in the street? How is it showing up in our workplaces in the form of disrespect? How is it happening for a lot of folks starting online and then maybe leading into their public, in their public spaces and their work lives? And so naturally we started to think about, uh, what do we really want, right? Holla back then was like, if someone says something to you, well, then you holla back. It was a response. But we didn't just want to respond, right? As Right to Be, or us coming into this iteration of Right to Be, we wanted people to know that you have the right to be safe. You have the right to be who you are, wherever you are, in whatever that means for you in that moment. And we also wanted to speak to the world we want to create, right? A world that's free of harassment, filled with humanity. And so it felt natural. One of our values here at Right to Be is the right to be you, that our name would just become Right to Be, And then funny enough, we also, as we started to expand through our Stand Up Against Street Harassment program, and we were going into different countries, folks were like, how do we translate it? Like, how do we translate this into our language? And so it felt easy. It felt like a kind of like Emily, our co-founder and president, says, it felt like baby Hollaback grew up and is now an adult.
Oh.
And so Right to Be is like the adult version of Hollaback.
Well, I think I'm really very pleased that the book addresses these 3 areas where harassment takes place. And work, I never would, I wouldn't have thought of it as a place that harassment takes place in some of the forms that you mentioned, which are people talking over people, taking credit for each other's ideas. So I think the strategies that you employ are really helpful and easy to remember with the phrase, the 5 Ds. So I know you know these in your sleep. So why don't you go over what the 5 Ds are, and then we can talk a little bit more about them.
Absolutely. 5 Ds of bystander intervention. They're as old as time. Right to Be did not invent them. Uh, Communities have been using them to take care of each other forever, right? We think about someone gets sick out in public, folks rally around them, right? Someone might get them some water, someone might call for help, someone might sit with them until, emergency response comes. Someone drops their keys or their wallet out in the parking lot or at the supermarket, say, hey, you dropped that. Those are all forms of bystander intervention. But for some reason, when we see hate or disrespect happening, a lot of us kind of freeze or don't know how to respond in that moment. And so, what Right to Be did was take these strategies that we've been using and that, to your point, make them easier for folks to kind of refer to them in those moments when we freeze, don't know what to do, and kind of you can figure it out. And so you have distract. Distract, we like to say, is for all of our creatives, because distracting is just that, creating a distraction to de-escalate the situation, right? And you can do this in a number of ways. So you can walk up to the person who's experiencing the harassment and say, "Hey, I'm lost. Could you help me?" Or you can say, "Oh my God, I haven't seen you in such a long time. How you doing?" We've seen folks. There was a famous or a viral TikTok video recently where a young man saw a woman being harassed at the mall, and he walked up to her and was like, "Hey, your aunt is looking for you over here. She asked me to come and get you," and kind of walked her away from the situation. The idea is to give the person experiencing the harm in that moment a way out of the situation, right? Um, we also have we've trained some theater and musical theater students who said, "I'm just gonna break out in song and dance, and everyone's gonna look at me, and that's gonna distract the situation," you know. And when we're talking about workplace settings, that shifts. In a workplace setting, you can you know, if you're facilitating a meeting, "Hey, we're gonna take 5 minutes for everyone right now." That is a distraction right there. You can say, "Hey, I have this project that I'm working on, and I really need your eyes on it. Can you come to my office or take a walk with me so we can talk about it?" Getting them out the situation. And in an online setting, you know, with online settings, a bit trickier, right? And so we only encourage that you intervene if you know the person who's doing the harassment. But what it can look like is, you know, a bunch of memes or gifs or a bunch of random questions. And the idea is to break up the energy in, let's say, a discussion post or a comments section that may be going off the rails. So that's distract. Then you have delegate. Delegate is for all of our community organizers, right? It's about getting help from other folks, right? Finding someone to help you. And so, you know, the first person we tell you to look at is the one sitting right next to you or right around you who probably wants to do something but does not know what to do, right? And so that can look like, "Hey, do you see what's happening? I don't feel comfortable stepping in. Could you say something? Or can you go and get help while I stand here and try to de-escalate," whatever that may look like. If you're in, let's say, a restaurant or you're at the library or on public transportation, you can go up to your waiter, your waitress, right? Go up to, or your server, you can go up to the store clerk, librarian, the person who's of authority in that space and say, "Hey, there's something happening over there. I don't feel comfortable. I don't think it's my place to do anything. Can you please do something about it?" And then, you know, folks always ask, should I call 911? And the answer is absolutely not. You should always check in with the person who's experiencing the harm before you call 911, because you do not know what that person's situation is, and you may actually put them in a worse situation, right? You don't know what their immigration status, what their experience with police has been in the past, right? You don't know if that person is maybe on parole, probation, they can actually have any contact with police, right? So if you can, check in with them. When we're talking about workplaces, delegating, you know, you go to HR or your supervisor and say, "Hey, this thing is happening. Can you help me? I need support." It's important to note that if you are a manager, you have a duty, a legal responsibility to report harassment, whether or not you think it's a joke. Okay. And then in online spaces, we say you can go ahead and report it to whatever platform that you're on and you're experiencing the harm on. That's delegate. Then we have document. Document is important because for the longest time, the burden of proof has been on us to prove that we went through this thing, right? I don't believe you. And so now we're lucky enough to have these smartphones with us all the time, right? And so you can just record what's happening to you, especially in public spaces, right? We do say be careful, whatever your local laws are around recording, because some places do require what's two-party consent, so both folks have to agree to being recorded. And I don't think the person harassing you is going to agree to you recording them.
Wait, stop harassing them and sign this release so that we can video you.
Exactly. And so we say that, and some tips that we give folks folks, try to not to draw attention to yourself, because, it may turn on you. If someone feels like you're recording them, hey, you're recording me. And then now all of a sudden you've become the target of that person's harm or harassment. And so maybe act like you're checking your phone, texting someone, taking a selfie. We say always keep 6 to 10 feet of space, because the further away you are, the more that you'll be able to see, and the more that you'll be able to capture. And also, we want you to verbally out on the while you're recording, say, hey, it's this date, this is happening, I'm at such and such location, it's this time of day, there's this many people present, here are the landmarks, or here's the address. These are all just to support, if you have the video. And most importantly, when you're done, give it to the person who experienced the harm, and let them be in choice about how that story gets told. It's not your story to tell.
Ah,
Um,
that's
that's important.
interesting because,
Yeah,
I think especially younger people are just, their desire to go viral may overcome their common sense about, um, about, well, I really want to get this out there.
I'm sorry, I had to sneeze.
It's okay. So I think that's really a very good point to, if you can, and if that person is reachable, within reach, to check in with them before you share it, and maybe let them make the decision, or ask them how they would feel about you sharing it.
Yeah, yeah, that's important. The person didn't choose to experience harassment or hate or whatnot. And so if we can restore their choice, then we should do that if we can. In a workplace setting, however, it's probably not going to be cool for you to pull out your phone and start recording what's happening, right? And so we tell people, listen, pen and paper, it's always existed. Even an email, just saying, this is what I saw. We were at this meeting. It was this time of day. There was this many people present. And then give it to that person and let them choose whether or not they want to report it, unless, of course, you're a manager, and then it's your responsibility to report it.
Well, plus, there are all kinds of ways to save, Slack and Teams, to save
Yeah,
anything that's been input into there, that you could also use. And I think that would be very helpful for going to HR with, if you had
yeah.
to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that leads me to when we're in online settings, right? We have all these new chat features for a lot of folks. Not new, but in workspaces are being used more now that we're in a hybrid setting. And so what we tell folks is take screenshots, even on social media. Take screenshots of it, because what happens is once you report it to the platform, typically it gets taken down, and then you're left with nothing, if you do want to report it further, or take it somewhere else. And so that is document. Then we have delay. And so funny thing is I'm actually a direct intervener, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But over the years, delay has actually become my preferred technique of intervention. And delay is about checking in with the person after the fact, right? And people are like, well, is that really intervention? It is. It's a form of intervention, and we'll tell you why. And so we've collected over 32,000 stories of hate and harassment over the organization's history. And we had an analysis done on these stories, and there was a few trends that came up. One was that folks, as little as a knowing glance, help folks who were experiencing harassment and minimize the trauma related to that harassment, as little as an annoying glance, so just validating their experience. But here's the other thing. Folks were actually more traumatized by the fact that people were seeing them being harassed and didn't do anything about it or even check in on them afterward. And so we say, here's the other thing. Sometimes something's happening and it happens so quick. It's a fleeting moment of harassment that by the time you even get a response or you go to do something, it's already passed. And so in those moments, you can still go up to the person and say, hey, are you okay? I saw what happened. That was not okay. Can I help you in any way? Can I walk with you somewhere? Can I call someone for you? Do you need me to accompany you where you're going, right? Um, if it's at work, similar concept, but it might look like, hey, you need me to cover you for 5 minutes while you go and take a walk, or you want to go grab a coffee together. Hey, you want to go grab some lunch? Is there anyone you want to call? Do you need a break? Right? It's really about that sense of care. In an online setting, what that looks like is sending someone direct messages, private messages of support. It can be sending them resources, whether like storing up the digital security or the digital safety. It can look like sending them fun content to uplift their spirits and still say, hey, I know that that wasn't okay, and I'm sorry that happened to you or that you're experiencing this. And
But
so,
I think one thing about it is that there are certain circumstances where where it's kind of scary to try and directly help out or intervene, where it's safer for you to kind of stay back and then offer your support. I mean, you have to gauge, as you say, these things happen in can be split seconds. You need to be aware of your own safety as well.
yeah, that's the most important, right? If you don't feel safe, well, how can you help others, right? And then last, we have direct. And so direct is intentionally last because often when folks think of intervening, they always think of like they have to directly intervene. They have to strap on a cape and put an S on their chest and kind of save the day. And we're saying, no, there's all these other ways. But if you do choose direct, because some of us just have a natural inclination, I'm one of those folks who just, it comes out, I see it, I have to say something about it. We want you to make sure and remember that this is not about you. This is about the person who's experiencing the harm. And so you want to make sure they're okay. And so when you use direct, you set a clear boundary and then you turn your attention to the person who's experiencing the harm. And what does setting a clear boundary look like? You want to observe what you see, right? Or what's happening. Give the person a clear and direct action, the person who's doing the harm, and then disengage. Don't go in a back and forth, right? You don't want to make the situation worse. You want to make sure that the person who experienced the harm is feeling okay. And so some suggestions are that person looks clearly uncomfortable. You should give them some space. That was disrespectful. Uh, you shouldn't, don't talk to that person anymore. Or that person has already told you they feel uncomfortable, step back. That was racist or that was sexist. You just stop talking to that person, right? This very clear. And then turn to the person. Now, some folks don't always feel comfortable or saying just being that blunt, right? Or sometimes let's talk about work, right? Because you're in a work setting, you have that one colleague that you have a good relationship with, but they say something off color. And you don't want to just come out and say, oh, that was racist, that was sexist, right? You want to give them a chance to kind of hopefully walk it back or really consider what they said or, give them the quote unquote benefit of the doubt. And so you would say something like, can you explain to me what you meant by whatever the statement is? Or I don't understand why this is so funny. Could you tell me more? The idea there is that you're giving the person a minute to consider what they just said, right? And then hopefully like, well, what I meant was, or and walk it back. So that is the hope. In an online setting, we do not recommend that you intervene directly unless you know the person who's doing the harassing and you feel safe intervening. And so, online is unwieldy. Next thing you know, you might try to directly intervene and your public information all of a sudden is all over social media or something. So you want to be very careful with how you use direct in an online setting. So those are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention.
So I wanted to read these two parts in the book that really that I thought were great. So the book basically is a set of instructions of how to use the 5 Ds, but there's also a test that gives you a chance to analyze your own personal style of intervening, which was very helpful. I was also a direct like you. And so one part that I liked just stated what our goal is as a bystander. And it said, as bystanders, our goal is to restore a sense of agency for the person being harassed in the situation. That is like just a dictionary definition of what you teach people, because it's not about you and it's not about your offense. It's about coming to the aid of the person being harassed in a way that will help them be the most helpful to them. So I thought
Hmm.
that was great. And then um, there's a part in the book about implicit bias and non-implicit bias. So I think, we've all heard a lot about implicit bias. We are all not born with, but we all develop prejudices based on our upbringing, our schooling, and we should be hopefully learning to recognize these issues by people pointing them out, or by self-knowledge, by learning from experience that this was not the right thing to say, that, and again, it's not all about you, but
Hmm.
so I really like this paragraph. We like to believe our decisions are rational, but in reality, most human decisions are made emotionally on autopilot, and we then collect or generate facts to justify them. When we see something or someone that feels dangerous, we've already launched into action subconsciously before we have even started thinking. Our sense of comfort or discomfort has already been engaged. In short, we use our thoughts to rationalize our feelings.
Hmm.
That was like, I had never even thought about that. That's like a big whoa.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Typically, that 30-second window we talked about when we decide whether or not we're going to do something or what we're going to say, right? That is what I call, because I'm a foster parent and I've had to do some trauma informed parenting, and some of the concept they taught us is about the reptile brain, the emotional brain, the logical brain. And so that reptile and emotional brain, they kick in right in those 30 seconds. And that is why it is super important for a couple of things. One, give yourself a minute to breathe before you decide where your next action is going to be. Just a quick second. Two, once you actually do make a decision, and let's say it does lead to some form of harm, right? Because at Right to Be, we like to believe, or one of the truths that, or one of the things we know to be true, is that we've all been in one of the seats. At some point in our life, we've experienced harm, we've witnessed harm, and we may have unintentionally or intentionally caused harm, right? And so it's learning, right? When you do make that decision or say that thing, or you know whatever it is that in that moment just got away from you, is know that you're not a bad person. You just may have made a bad decision, or made the choice that was only available to you at that moment. We won't even call it bad, but that you can learn from it, right? Like you can learn from that moment, and that then you can choose, you can be in choice about making a better decision later on. And I think that's one of the things people think, oh, I have implicit bias. One, they feel like I don't know what to do with it. How am I supposed to cure myself of it? Or two, I'm a horrible person. And it's like, no, you're not. We all have implicit bias, spoiler alert, right? Every one of us has it. And you're never going to completely get rid of it, but you can actively work towards it because it's a journey, right? Not a destination.
And this is, doing some of the acts that you describe in the book are definitely becoming an ally, and becoming more aware of what happens. I'm thinking specifically about on the street because, first of all, I just finished reading this book, great book called Stop Telling Women to Smile. It came
Hmm.
out in 2020, and it was by Tatiana Fazlali Sadeh. Sorry if I didn't pronounce her name right. But she was so upset by street harassment that she started a campaign where she puts up posters all over cities that are quotes from women that she's interviewed who have been harassed. And she spreads the word that way, and also from her book where people tell about actual stories. And then in 2019, I actually had on Book Stew an author named Shauna Potter, who wrote
Hmm.
a book called Making Spaces Safer. And her
Hmm.
book was aimed at people who go to bars and concerts, because she's a musician, and
Hmm.
how to explain how to handle harassment that takes place in those spaces. And it was
Hmm.
aimed at not only people who go to concerts and music events, but at bartenders, servers, managers. So, having you on with this book, with I've Got Your Back, which is the most recent of those 3 books, just follows along a path that I think is so positive, that attention is being paid to this issue.
Mm,
And I
mhm,
think
mhm,
online is probably the most common at this point, the most insidious. And, if someone harasses you at work, you have HR managers you can go to, but online seems like a lost cause. I mean,
mm,
Elon Musk doesn't care. You have no way really of getting to someone in Facebook who's really going to listen to you. So I think to give us all steps of how to handle situations we don't like, while acknowledging that the likelihood of anyone above is going to do anything about it, we kind of have to take the power into our own hands. And I
mhm,
also like the concept of not necessarily not going back and forth with a harasser. Like,
mm,
say what you want to say what you need to say, but there's no point in getting into an argument with someone who's harassing somebody, especially
exactly.
on the street or at work.
Yeah.
Say your piece, do the right thing for the person who's being harassed, and then let the person doing the harassment go. Goodbye.
Yeah, that is absolutely true, right? Like, why do you want to have an energy exchange with someone who's already demonstrated to you at that moment that they do not have the capacity, nor do they want to have the capacity to be kind or extend someone grace or a kindness, And to the point that you made earlier, I too am extremely, extremely grateful, and I don't even say joy, elated that folks are now starting to pay closer attention to the very real issues of harassment, of bullying, because 10 years, 15 years ago, 20, almost 20 years ago, when Emily Main and her group of friends founded the organization, harassment was one of those things like, oh, you just need to grow thicker skin. You need to get over it. No one cares about that. Not realizing that really harassment just precedes the more egregious forms of violence and hate that we start to see spewed in our communities, in the media, right? And so if we get folks identifying harassment very early on when it is disrespectful, it is microaggressive, we get them to intervene in those moments. We start to create a culture. Well, first we start to erode a toxic culture, but we start to create a culture where people take care of each other and we don't even allow things like sexual assault, or physical assault, or murders, things like that to even happen, right? Because we have now created a culture of taking care of each other. And so I'm
Well,
grateful.
I think that, oops, I'm getting a Zoom warning. I think what you just said is the best way to sum up our conversation and to wrap up the show. So I'm going to suggest that people buy the book, I've Got Your Back, and also that if they like to become more involved, that they get in touch with Right to Be. And I will
Yeah,
put all that information at the end of the episode. I'm sure there are probably teachers and facilities where you could come in and do a presentation for groups. That would be so helpful to do that. So I'm so happy that you came on Book Stew, Jorge. Thank you, and your organization is doing great work.
thank you, Eileen. Thank you so much.
So it was good to have you, Book Stew viewers and listeners. I'll be putting up some slides with information. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you get the book, you'll learn more about your own intervention style. So that's it. Have a good night. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you, Eileen.
Bye-bye.